Imagine you're offered a deal. You'll be paid generously, given a clear set of instructions, and told exactly what to do. The rules are simple. Follow them, get rewarded. Break them, get punished. For decades, that was the model. That was how schools were run, how companies were managed, and how entire economies were built. Carrot and stick. Reward and punishment. Simple, clean, supposedly effective. But here's what no one told you. That model is broken. Not slightly broken. Fundamentally, dangerously, silently broken. And the evidence has been sitting in laboratories, in research papers, and in the lived experience of millions of frustrated, burned out, creatively suffocated human beings for over 50 years. The system designed to motivate you has actually been killing your drive. Today, we're going deep into one of the most important books ever written about human behavior. A book that challenged corporations, rewrote psychology, and forced a global conversation about what it truly means to be motivated. This is Daniel Pink's Drive, the surprising truth about what motivates us. And nothing about this story is what you expect. Daniel Pink is not your typical motivational speaker. He's not a life coach selling confidence on stage. He's a researcher, a thinker, a man who spent years digging through behavioral science, economics, and organizational psychology looking for the truth about why human beings do what they do. He served as chief speechwriter to Vice President Al Gore. He has written 6 books on work, behavior, and human potential. His 2009 TED Talk on motivation became one of the most watched in history, with over 20 million views. And Drive, published that same year, spent years on bestseller lists, translated into dozens of languages, and fundamentally changed how forward-thinking companies approach leadership, management, and performance. But why does this book matter so much? Because Pink didn't just share opinions. He gathered decades of scientific research, synthesized it into something urgent and undeniable, and asked a question that made the entire business world uncomfortable. What if we've been motivating people the wrong way this entire time? To understand where Pink begins, you have to go back to the middle of the 20th century. In 1949, a behavioral psychologist named Harry Harlow ran an experiment that should have changed everything. He gave a group of rhesus monkeys a simple mechanical puzzle to solve. No rewards. No food waiting at the end. No human trainer offering praise. Just the puzzle. And the monkeys played with it. Enthusiastically. Independently. They appeared to enjoy the act of solving itself. They were motivated by nothing external at all. Harlow was confused. At the time, scientists believed there were only 2 primary drivers of behavior. Biological drives, hunger, thirst, the need for shelter, and learned responses to external rewards and punishments. But the monkeys weren't hungry. They hadn't been trained. And there was no reward. So why were they doing this? Harlow called it a third drive. The satisfaction of the task itself. The inherent pleasure of engaging with a challenge. He published his findings. And then, for decades, the scientific world largely ignored him. Because what Harlow found didn't fit the dominant operating system of human motivation. It threatened the entire architecture of how businesses were built and how schools were designed. It was easier to dismiss it than to rebuild everything. But then something happened. In 1969, a young psychologist named Edward Deci ran his own experiment at Carnegie Mellon University. He divided students into 2 groups. Both groups were asked to work on a set of challenging puzzles. Interesting puzzles. The kind people voluntarily spend time on. But one group was offered money for solving them. The other group was not. At first, nothing surprising. The paid group worked hard. They were motivated by the money, as expected. But then Deci removed the reward. He told them the money was gone. And here's what he discovered. The group that had been paid stopped engaging with the puzzles. Their interest dropped below where it started. They had actually become less interested in the puzzles than before the money existed. The group that was never paid? They kept playing. Still curious. Still engaged. Still motivated. What Deci discovered, and what Pink would later put into language the world could not ignore, is that external rewards don't just fail to increase intrinsic motivation. They actively destroy it. When you offer someone a reward for doing something they already enjoy, you change the nature of that activity. Suddenly, it's no longer something they do because they love it. It's something they do for the reward. And when the reward disappears, so does the behavior. Pink calls this the Sawyer effect, inspired by a scene in Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer, where Tom tricks his friends into painting a fence by making it seem like a privilege, not a chore. The moment something becomes work done for an external gain, the internal joy evaporates. The activity transforms from play to labor. And this, says Pink, is the first great hidden tragedy of how we motivate people. Pink describes human history through the lens of operating systems, software running in the background of civilization, determining behavior. The first operating system, Motivation 1.0, was survival. Shelter. Reproduce. It was the software of our ancestors, running effectively for hundreds of thousands of years. And then as societies became more complex, as farming gave way to industry, a new system emerged. Motivation 2.0, the belief that human beings are biological machines. That to make them productive, you simply need to attach the right reward or threaten the right punishment. Carrot and stick. It worked surprisingly well for the industrial age. When work was repetitive, mechanical, and rule-based, external controls kept people on task. Assembly lines ran. Factories produced. Quotas were met. But the world changed. The economy shifted from mechanical to creative, from assembly lines to innovation labs, from following instructions to solving problems no one had ever seen before. And Motivation 2.0, this industrial-era operating system, is completely incompatible with the modern world. Think about it. When you need someone to write code that doesn't exist yet, or design an advertising campaign that breaks through noise, or develop a therapy that changes lives, you cannot threaten them into excellence. You cannot reward your way to a breakthrough. Creativity, by its very nature, requires a different kind of fuel. And here is where Pink's argument becomes urgent. We are running 21st century human beings on a 20th century motivational operating system. And the mismatch is costing us everything. It's why talented people burn out. Why promising companies stagnate. Why students who love learning in childhood begin to hate school by high school. The system isn't failing by accident. It was never designed for this. We need an upgrade. And that upgrade is what Pink calls Motivation 3.0. To explain this upgrade, Pink introduces two types of people. Not personality types, not fixed traits, but behavioral patterns shaped by how we've been motivated over time. Type X behavior is driven by external desires. The person who works for the bonus. The student who studies for the grade. The artist who creates for approval. Type X is not shallow or wrong. It's simply the behavior pattern produced by a lifetime of operating under Motivation 2.0. External rewards become the goal, and the activity becomes the means. Type 1 behavior is driven by internal desires. The person who works because the work itself is meaningful. The student who stays up reading, not because there's an exam tomorrow, but because the subject fascinates them. The artist who creates because they cannot imagine not creating. Type 1 people aren't indifferent to external rewards. They simply aren't driven by them at their core. And here's what the research shows consistently. Type 1 behavior leads to higher performance, greater creativity, longer-lasting motivation, and deeper personal satisfaction. Not because Type 1 people are morally superior, but because intrinsic motivation is simply more powerful, more durable, and more aligned with the complex, creative demands of the modern world. The goal, Pink says, is not to eliminate external rewards. It's to stop treating them as the primary driver of human performance, and to begin building environments that cultivate Type 1 behavior through 3 core elements. 3 fundamental human needs that, when met, unlock the most powerful force in human motivation: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's begin with autonomy, the deep human need to direct our own lives. Pink defines autonomy not as the absence of structure, but as the freedom to choose how we engage with structure. And the research here is staggering. Across hundreds of studies, in schools and businesses and psychological laboratories, giving people more control over what they do, when they do it, how they do it, and who they do it with produces dramatic increases in performance, engagement, creativity, and well-being. Consider a company called Atlassian, the Australian software firm. They began a practice called FedEx Days. Once a quarter, engineers were given 24 hours of completely unstructured time. No assignments, no deliverables, no manager checking in. Just build whatever you want. The only rule? You have to ship something by the end of the day. The results were extraordinary. Teams delivered more creative fixes, more innovative features, and more genuinely useful software in those 24 hours than they produced in weeks of normal, managed, goal-directed work. The freedom itself was the catalyst. Autonomy didn't produce chaos. It produced brilliance. Or consider the now famous story of Wikipedia versus Encarta. In the year 2000, Microsoft poured millions of dollars into Encarta, a professionally managed, paid expert online encyclopedia. Everything about it was Motivation 2.0. Hired professionals, external rewards, clear guidelines and management oversight. Meanwhile, Wikipedia was launched with 0 paid employees, no professional oversight, and no salaries. Just volunteers writing about things they cared about, for the love of knowledge, for the satisfaction of contributing to something larger than themselves. By 2009, Encarta was dead. Wikipedia had grown into one of the largest repositories of human knowledge ever created, with millions of articles in hundreds of languages. No one could have predicted it, because no operating model built on Motivation 2.0 would have expected volunteers, working for free, to outperform paid professionals. But they did, decisively. This is what autonomy does. When people feel genuine ownership over their work, when they feel they've chosen to engage rather than been forced to comply, something fundamental changes. The work becomes theirs, and people who own their work pour themselves into it. Pink identifies 4 dimensions where autonomy matters most. Autonomy over task, what you work on. Autonomy over time, when you do it. Autonomy over technique, how you approach it. And autonomy over team, who you work with. The more of these 4 freedoms an environment provides, the more deeply engaged and creatively powerful the people within it become. But autonomy without direction can drift. Without something to reach toward, freedom becomes emptiness. And this is where the second element becomes essential. The urge to get better and better at something that matters. Think about the last time you were completely absorbed in an activity. Not watching the clock, not counting down to a break, but fully, deeply present. Time felt different. Minutes passed like seconds, or perhaps like hours, depending on your focus. You were in what psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi famously called flow, the state of optimal experience. Flow happens at a very specific intersection, when a challenge is just difficult enough to require full engagement, but not so overwhelming it produces anxiety. That sweet spot, where your current skill meets a worthy test, is where mastery lives. And Pink argues that the pursuit of mastery, not the achievement of it, is one of the most powerful sources of human motivation. Think about musicians who practice 8 hours a day. Not because someone forces them, not for a reward waiting at the end, but because getting better at the instrument they love is intrinsically satisfying. Think about athletes who train in the dark before the world wakes up, chasing a version of themselves that doesn't exist yet. Think about surgeons who voluntarily study techniques they'll rarely use, because excellence itself is the goal. The pursuit of mastery is profoundly human, and yet most workplaces and schools are designed in direct opposition to it. Pink outlines 3 important laws of mastery that reshape how we should think about growth. The first law, mastery is a mindset. Carol Dweck's landmark research on growth versus fixed mindsets showed that people who believe abilities can be developed through effort consistently outperform those who believe talent is fixed. If you see your intelligence or skill as a ceiling, you'll stop pushing when it gets hard. If you see it as a floor, difficulty becomes information, not failure. The foundation of mastery is the belief that getting better is always possible. The second law, mastery is painful. There is no shortcut. Research on elite performers, including Anders Ericsson's famous studies on deliberate practice, consistently shows that approximately 10,000 hours of focused, intentional, feedback-informed practice separates novices from masters. And the key word is deliberate. Not passive repetition, not comfortable practice, but the kind that pushes you to the edge of your current capability and demands more from you each time. This is why people who love the process of getting better, who find meaning in the struggle itself, are the ones who achieve mastery. Because the path is long and uncomfortable. Only genuine intrinsic motivation sustains that journey. The third law, mastery is an asymptote. This is perhaps the most profound and beautiful truth in Pink's entire book. An asymptote, in mathematics, is a line that a curve approaches infinitely but never quite reaches. Mastery is like that. You can spend a lifetime getting better at something, and perfection will always remain just ahead, just beyond your current reach. For some people, that is the most discouraging thing imaginable. But for those driven by genuine love of the craft, it is endlessly energizing. True masters don't pursue perfection because they expect to achieve it. They pursue it because the chase itself is the point. Because waking up tomorrow slightly better than you were today is its own reward. Now you have autonomy. You're directing your own work. You're pursuing mastery. You're getting better. But there's still something missing. The deepest question of all. The question that, when left unanswered, empties even the most skilled and autonomous life of meaning. Why does any of this matter? Purpose. The yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves. Of the 3 elements, Pink suggests purpose may be the most transformative, because autonomy answers the question of freedom. Mastery answers the question of growth. But purpose answers the most fundamental question of all. What is this for? Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, observed that the human being can endure almost anyhow if they have a compelling why. People can tolerate brutal conditions, tremendous suffering, even the loss of everything external, if they believe their existence serves a purpose beyond themselves. And conversely, people living in comfort and safety, with every external reward available, can feel completely hollow if their lives lack meaning. This insight is not just philosophical. It's practical, it's measurable, and it has enormous implications for how we build companies, schools, and careers. Pink points to a fascinating generational shift. As the millennial generation entered the workforce, something unexpected happened. Companies that expected them to be motivated primarily by salary and status found them difficult, restless, and hard to retain. But companies that offered them work connected to a larger mission, organizations that could articulate a clear and genuine sense of purpose, found an entirely different kind of employee. Deeply engaged, willing to work harder than the job description required. Ambassadors for the organization even outside office hours. This wasn't just idealism. It was a different operating system activating. Consider the difference between 2 doctors. One became a physician for the income, the status, the respect. The other became a physician because they were genuinely moved by human suffering and wanted to reduce it. Early in their careers, their external performance might look similar. Both pass exams. Both complete procedures. Both receive evaluations. But over a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, the one driven by purpose develops differently. They take on harder cases. They stay current with new research not because they have to but because they want to understand. They connect more deeply with patients. They're more resilient when medicine is brutally difficult. And they report higher satisfaction at the end of careers that the other doctor often describes as exhausting and disappointing. Pink draws on an important distinction between profit motive and purpose motive. He's not anti-profit. He's not arguing that money doesn't matter. People need to be paid fairly. Compensation that feels inadequate or unjust becomes a constant distraction and source of resentment. But once compensation reaches a threshold of adequacy, additional money produces diminishing returns on motivation, performance, and satisfaction. What takes over at that point is purpose. The need to contribute, to matter, to build something that lasts. To know that the hours of your life added up to something real. Pink highlights what he calls the purpose maximizers, organizations that have learned to position profit not as the goal but as the byproduct of genuine purpose. Companies like Tom's Shoes, which built a buy one, give one model into their DNA. Or the rise of certified B corporations, businesses legally structured to consider the impact on people and the planet alongside profit. These aren't just feel-good branding exercises. Research suggests that purpose-driven companies consistently attract more loyal customers, retain more engaged employees, and produce more sustained innovation than their purely profit-focused competitors. Purpose isn't soft. Purpose is competitive advantage. And for the individual, purpose is the difference between a career and a calling, between showing up and showing up fully. Now, let's return to a question that runs through the entire book like a current. If intrinsic motivation is so powerful, why do we keep defaulting to rewards and punishments? Because they work in the short term. This is the trap. Pink uses the term if-then rewards for the most dangerous category of external incentive. If you do this, then you'll get that. If you sell 20 units, you'll get a bonus. If you finish your homework, you'll get screen time. If you hit the quarterly target, you'll get the promotion. These rewards produce a quick burst of focused, narrow behavior. And for simple, algorithmic tasks, they can be effective. But for anything requiring creativity, judgment, long-term thinking, or genuine engagement, if-then rewards are catastrophic. They narrow thinking. They encourage people to take the shortest path to the reward, not the most interesting or effective one. They reduce curiosity. They eliminate experimentation. They destroy the very qualities that make someone excellent at complex, creative work. Pink cites a study by researchers Sam Glucksberg and Carl Dunker involving the famous candle problem. Participants were given a candle, a box of thumbtacks, and a book of matches, and asked to attach the candle to the wall in a way that, when lit, wouldn't drip wax on the table. One group was offered a reward for solving it quickly. The other group was simply asked to work on the problem. The rewarded group took significantly longer to solve the problem, because the reward created performance pressure that narrowed cognitive focus. They kept trying obvious solutions instead of seeing the creative one, emptying the box of thumbtacks, using it as a shelf, and pinning it to the wall. The group without the external pressure thought more broadly, more creatively, and solved the problem faster. Rewards narrow the spotlight of attention, and creative problems require a wide, open, expansive view. This doesn't mean abandon all reward systems. Pink is careful here. He acknowledges that now that rewards, unexpected, after-the-fact acknowledgments of genuinely great work, do far less damage than if-then contingencies. praise for the quality of effort rather than the result of performance is actually motivationally sound. And rewards that are informational rather than controlling, that give genuine feedback rather than simply dangling incentives, can support rather than undermine intrinsic motivation. The lesson isn't that rewards are evil. It's that when we substitute rewards for meaning, we've made a trade we don't fully understand. And the hidden cost of that trade is paid in creativity, passion, and the kind of long-term sustained excellence that only intrinsic motivation can build. So what does all of this look like in practice? How do you actually apply the principles of drive to your own life, your own work, your own teams? Pink offers several concrete starting points. He suggests asking yourself a simple diagnostic question at the end of each day. Was I in control of my time today? Did I make progress in work that matters? Did what I did today connect to something beyond just me? These three questions, roughly mapping to autonomy, mastery, and purpose, quickly reveal where your motivational energy is being nourished and where it's being drained. For leaders and managers, Pink recommends an audit of how rewards are structured. Not eliminating compensation, but examining whether the motivational signals you're sending are cultivating genuine engagement or manufacturing compliance. Are you treating people like machines to be programmed, or like human beings with drives that, when aligned with the work, produce extraordinary things? He also describes what he calls Goldilocks tasks, assignments that are neither too easy nor too difficult, that sit right at the edge of someone's current capability and invite them to stretch. This is the deliberate creation of flow conditions. Not leaving engagement to chance, but designing environments where mastery has room to grow. And for purpose, he suggests something deeply personal. A sentence. Not a mission statement designed by a committee, but a single sentence that captures what you want your life's work to ultimately mean. Not your job title, not your salary level, but the answer to the question, what is all of this for? Writing that sentence, returning to it, letting it guide decisions, is one of the most powerful acts of motivational architecture you can perform for yourself. Here's what Daniel Pink ultimately wants us to understand. The question of motivation is not academic. It's not a management theory. It's not something for HR departments to debate at annual conferences. It's one of the most personal, most urgent questions any human being will ever face. Because how you are motivated determines what kind of work you produce, what kind of life you build, what you become over years and decades of choices made either because you had to or because you wanted to. There is a version of you that shows up every day to earn the carrot and avoid the stick. That version is compliant. It follows instructions. It hits targets. It does enough. And it slowly, quietly dies inside. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in tiny increments, surrender by surrender, until one day you look up and realize you can't remember the last time you were genuinely excited to begin a day of work. And there is another version of you, the one that is curious, that wants to get better, that believes the work matters, that finds, in the act of contributing something real to something larger, a sense of meaning that no paycheck has ever been able to replicate. That version is alive. That version produces work that endures. That version is what you came here to be. Autonomy, mastery, purpose. Not three corporate buzzwords, but three essential human needs that, when taken seriously, transform organizations, elevate individuals, and make the hours of our lives feel like they actually meant something. The surprising truth about motivation? It was never really about the carrot or the stick. It was always about the desire to direct your own path, to grow beyond your current limits, and to offer what only you can offer to a world that genuinely needs it. That is the drive, and it's been inside you all along.